tonight we also have Gerald from Contino who will be talking about why friends don't let friends build landing zones. And also David who will be doing a talk on some new features in AWS. I think specifically on Fargate and Session Manager.
New-ish.
New-ish.
Some
I think
very
everything's
new,
newish in AWS.
some new-ish, yes.
So yeah, I'll just hand over to David and,
Okay.
oh, actually, sorry, one last thing before I hand over is the previous month I did mention to everyone that we will be doing a draw for the best photo with our polar bear. So we've extended it an extra month. Not if anyone has taken a photo, please do send it through. But grab a polar bear over there and take the best picture you can anywhere on the top of the harbour bridge. And they will be winning a prize. I'll let you guys know during the month what it will be, something like a drone or something similar. So yeah, grab it there. If you don't get one, come see me after and I'll sort you out. Thanks, David.
Okay.
Thanks, Jackson.
Okay. And
Yeah, my name's David Williams. I work for Polar 7 as a site reliability engineer. I've just changed that from other stuff. I thought I'll try something new. So what I'm going to be looking at tonight is a little bit of Fargate. Since I created this, I've come across some new exciting things to fill this up. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Fargate. We're going to spend much more time on Systems Manager. The reason that we're bringing Fargate up now is, as you know, Fargate's been around for a little while. There was a good presentation by Mitch Beaumont of AWS at the user group sometime last year, where he introduced Fargate and EKS and all the other bits and pieces to do with the containers. And the reason I'm bringing Fargate up tonight is that in January there was a substantial price drop. So now it can actually be cheaper to use Fargate than to use EC2s, depending on your workloads. So we're just going to go a bit of why you would want to use it, when you'd want to use it, and when you wouldn't want to use it, what performance considerations, and then we'll go on to Systems Manager, and we'll have a look at Session Manager. Probably not that much a run command, but perimeter store. There's something really cool you can now do with perimeter store. So let's go to Fargate. So you often see these types of diagrams of containers, you know, the ideal, the reality when you start using them. And this is what Fargate's supposed to be doing for you. You don't have to worry about this part of it. Once you start using it, you start worrying about containers, not EC2 instances. So really it takes a lot of that worry away from maintaining those EC2 instances. So why use it? As I said, it takes away the burden of instance management. Now, when you have a look at your bill, you'll see there's no EC2 charges for Fargate. You go onto your bill and you'll see it there itemized Fargate. CPU, memory, by time. That's how you get charged. So you decide how much you want to spend by how much CPU and how much memory you're actually going to be using. And if you're not using any CPU or any memory, you don't pay for anything. There's no EC2 instances sitting around doing nothing. So when is this a good time to use Fargate? Depends on your workloads. If you've got very stable workloads, very predictable workloads, and you can pack your EC2 instances with containers, and you know what's going to happen, then Fargate's not going to compete with that. You can put on some reserved instances onto those EC2 instances, and that'll be cheaper. But if you've got very spiky workloads, then Fargate can actually work out cheaper than having EC2 instances. So it depends on your workloads. Also, you don't have to worry about scaling your EC2 instances anymore. That'll get done for you. You don't have to worry about availability zones, all that sort of stuff. Don't have to worry about that. In fact, after a while, you don't you just don't think about EC2 instances. Now, if you're using Lambda, do you think about EC2 instances? You don't. But Lambda runs on containers which run on EC2 instances, but you don't have to think about that. And it's pretty much the same with Fargate after a while. You just don't think about the EC2 instances. There are some considerations, like if you're going to create a container and there isn't an EC2 instance underlying in Fargate, for you to put that container on, they will fire one up for you, and then there's going to be a lot more latency for when you bring up those containers. One of the problems you'll get using Fargate is that, as you know, with containers, you can use volumes, and you can have volumes on the EC2 instances that you'll be using, or you could actually have that abstracted out further into the EFS, Elastic File System. So that means that the application can be completely stateless. So the EC2 instances go down, the containers go down, and you still have that state preserved. You can't do that with Fargate. Now you do get you can create volumes, but they only last for as long as the task will last for. So if you say had several containers inside a task, then they could use a shared volume and communicate with each other. But as soon as that task goes, then whatever good data you've got on there is going to be gone. So again, you get 4 gigabytes of shared storage, and then when the task goes, that's gone forever. And again, as I said before, you can get reserved instances to make it cheaper if you have very stable workloads. And scaling can be a little bit slower, and depending, but again, you don't have that worry of having to maintain those EC2 instances. Now that's all the time I'm going to spend on Fargate. Really the big announcement was that it's now dropped in price. When you have a look at the page, it says, I think the announcement was 30 to 60%, which sounds great. But when you actually dig into it, it's not quite that simple, because the price reductions are different for CPU than they are for memory. It's much greater for memory, not as great for CPU. So if you've got CPU intensive, then you're not going to have that much of a saving. But if you're using memory intensive containers, then yes, you'll make a big saving. So that's one of the things to consider. So let's have a look at Systems Manager. Now, who is using Systems Manager? There's a few people using Systems Manager. Not a lot, really. Okay, who's using AWS? Everybody, right. Then if you're using AWS, have a good look at Systems Manager. There's a lot of old school, what we now would call old school practices that you just get rid of by using Systems Manager. And I'll show you some things that are pretty cool about it. So the one thing we're going to have a look at first is a thing called Session Manager. Now, as you know, when you first start off with Amazon Web Services, you fire up an EC2 instance, and then you figure out how to get into that instance. So you get the keys, you SSH into it, then you realise, oh, my security groups aren't open. You figure all that stuff out, and then you go ching, and you're in. Now, the problem with SSH keys is that you have to store them somewhere. So you have to store them on a laptop. Now that laptop goes, and those SSH keys can go with it, and someone could use those to break in. Also, sometimes over time, the actual key that's on the instance might not have been stored properly, and it gets lost. So then you can't get into that instance. There's other scenarios where, as you may or may not know, when you create an instance, there's a program called Cloud Init that runs. Cloud Init will then kick off CFN Init, user data, all the bootstrapping will be started from Cloud Init. Now I've seen some customers running some older AMIs where there was a conflict and Cloud Init did not come up. Right? It went to run and it fell over. Now what that means is the EC2 user key does not get loaded. So you can't get into the instance to figure out why it's not starting. So So it goes onto the auto scaling group and goes, starts scaling in and out, and you go, oh, have a look at the logs. Oh, where are the logs gone? There's no logs, because the logs haven't run yet, because Kalen couldn't run the logs. But if you had Systems Manager, you could get into that instance. Now, the reason for that is that it's managed by Amazon. Amazon manages the ingress and egress are going into that instance. You can't see how they're doing that. I can take the security group off that instance. A system manager or session manager will still work. It doesn't make any difference. The tunnel is encrypted, and you don't need SSH keys. So I'll show you in a minute that when you actually log into that instance and you go to there's a user called SSM user, and you go and have a look at that user, you look in our home directory, there's no .ssh directory. It's not using keys that we know of, that we can use. So you don't have to worry about these ports, you don't have to worry about keys. You can just go into the console, use Session Manager, and log into instances. Now, some of you may be saying, how do you control the permissions on this thing? Well, that's the beauty of it as well. You can control this through IAM. So no longer do you have keys distributed, but you can have a user in IAM or a role in IAM, and say you're an organization and a user leaves, you disable that account and they can't get into those instances. So from that point of view, it's great. Now I'll show you some of the policies that you can use. So you can actually use policies that will allow people to log into certain instances and not other instances. And the way you can control that is through tags. And as you well know, that tags are incredibly powerful in Amazon Web Services. So you can go through, tag your instances, only allow people to get those tags when they log into the console. They go into the Session Manager, and they're the only instances that they can log into. And you can control which one they can terminate as well. So let's have a little demo, and I'll show you what we're talking about here. Right. So this is I just created a quick VPC. It's got a Linux Bastion host. Do I need that anymore? Not really. I've got 3 NAT instances. Now I do need those, though. So one of the ways that systems manager needs egress to the internet, otherwise it won't work. So you need to have this is in a private network, private subnet, so it needs these to be able to get out for it to work. The other thing you need to make this work is the SSM agent. And you might be thinking, oh, I've got to go and install that and then get it to run at startup and init and all that sort of stuff. No, you don't. Back, I think about 2017, it comes installed and it's running. You have to do nothing. It just runs as soon as you start the instance up. You don't have to manage any of that. The only other thing you need is you need to put a policy onto the role of the EC2 instance, and that policy allows you to connect to SSM. What are you doing? Right, so this instance we've got here, you can see that if I look at my inbound, you'll see 172.17.00.16. So that's only going to be an internally available on port 22. But you also see here it's on 10.0.44. So that's not going to work. Nothing's going to work. Nothing can get into that instance because that networking is going to stop it. Now we have a very quick look here at the I'll show you that later. It's going to be distracting. So let's go to Systems Manager itself. So okay, there we go. This is the Systems Manager console, and you can see here we've got these various commands that we can run here. There's quite a lot of things you can actually do, and I haven't used quite a few of these functions. You've got automation, that's a little bit like a very four-man chef. Session manager, which we're going to look at. Patch manager, you can do this for Windows or Linux, and that can automatically patch all your instances, again, using tags. Maintenance windows, that's really like a cron-like function where you can schedule tasks to run. And again, your targets will be determined by what tags you have on them. And down the bottom here is another thing we'll be looking at later, is a thing called parameter store. So you can store things in here, and you can have secrets in here, and when you want to use those, you can go through the command line interface or through CloudFormation, and you can make a call to get those values. So you've got a centralized place to put things, and we'll show you how handy that can be. So let's go to Session Manager, and you'll see there's my instance. Log in. Right. I'll go to the home directory, and you can see we've got two users. There's EC2 user. They'll have the key that I put in when I created the instance, and there's the SSM user. So if I have a look at typing under pressure. You'll see EC2 user, they're going to have the SSH directory with the key in it. But there's no key embedded in here for the SSM. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Now, as I said before, I mean, what do I need a Bastion host for anymore? I don't even need, unless I want to connect through like port 80 or something, I get some web pages up, I don't even need a VPN, because I'm actually in the network, and it's controlled through the console. So it's controlled through your login, which of course you would all have multi-factor authentication on your logins, because otherwise, you know, it's very dangerous. So I don't think there's actually anything more I really want to say on Session Manager, except let's have a look at a policy. So this is a policy you can add to, say, a group or a user, an IAM user, and so it allows the start session. So this user can start any session that has these tags on it. So you can define the tags that they can actually create those sessions for. And again, down here, you're going to allow them to terminate the session, but only sessions that are started with that user. So they may see other sessions up there, but they can't terminate those. You could also put in instances here if you wanted to, but if they're on auto-scaling groups, that's not really going to help you too much. So the tagging is the best way to do that. Okay, let's have a look at parameter store. Now, one of the problems, I just put this in for a customer today. One of the problems you have when you're managing customer accounts, and over time, you have to update AMIs. And traditionally, the AMI could be in a file, or it could be inside the CloudFormation template. If you want to make your templates transportable across regions, what you generally do is you put in the mapping section all the regions and the different AMIs that you want to use in those regions. As you know, that the Amazon AMIs are regional. So you then have, when you want to update them, you need to go into that CloudFormation template and then update those AMIs. So one of the ways you can get around this is, why don't we use parameter store? We've got one central place where we can put our AMIs, and then we can make a call to, this is actually a little snippet from a CloudFormation template, and you'll see this is it's in the parameters section. So this is the parameter, AMI ID, description, the type, you'll see it's an SCM parameter, the image ID, and this is a value in the parameter store that I put in there. That's the key. The value is the actual AMI ID. Now that solves some problems for us in that we've now got a centralized place where we can get our AMI from. But the problem here, of course, is that it's still manual. I've got to go in here and change this. Now I can subscribe to an SNS topic that Amazon put out that tells me when new AMIs come out. So I get an email going, oh, great, so I get in here and I set this up. However, this is not going to be cross-regional. I'd have to put a whole series of these in for each region. And then in my CloudFormation template, I'd have to put the region in that string so I went and got the right AMI. Now this is an improvement, definitely. But what would be really nice is, what if there was a public parameter store where you could go and get this and somebody else maintained that for you. So you didn't have to maintain that. So every time you made the call to that public parameter store, you got the latest Amazon ID. Great, that's one problem we've got solved. Unfortunately, we have this problem of regional AMIs. But when you're running your scripts, your CLI, you're running your CloudFormation, you have already defined which region you're going to be running this in. So, if we use this is the public Amazon Linux latest parameter store, and when I make a call to this, it knows what region I'm in. I don't have to change this at all, and it'll get the AMI back for that region. So I put that now in my CloudFormation template, and that's it. Forget all about it. Because each time I now build the stack, I'm going to get the latest Amazon AMI. Now, a couple of announcements. This came out fairly recently. You may or may not know that there's two ways of the URLs for S3. There's these path-based, and then these virtual hosted style. And it's just a URL, so it might be your website, and then you've got your directory and then the files. However, this is a bit of a choke point in terms of IP addresses. So what Amazon have done is that rather than going to this and then going off to the path, they've added the bucket. This has been around for a while, it's not new, but this is going to be deprecated. So the bucket name now goes into here, but that's now a subdomain. So that can be split up a lot more, so that's much more granular than using the other way. Now, they were going to stop this in 2020, and it wouldn't work anymore. Obviously, people objected because some people have got the stuffs in code and they're making calls to this, so it would be pretty nasty. So they're going to allow that, I think, a bit further on, so you can use it for quite a bit of time yet. Now, the other consideration here when you're talking about S3 is that now if you're looking at this is now a URL that can be resolved. And here's my bucket name, right? So I put in bucket.logs into here. And that's going to break it up into subdomain, subdomain, subdomain. So when you're actually naming your buckets, you want to make sure that they're going to be URL compliant. So use something like this, but not the dot. Now, of course, there's an exception for that. If you're hosting your website in S3, then that's going to be the way you would do it. So that's going to be your domain name. mybucket.logs.com, whatever. Yeah, so. And last, I'll just briefly go over this. This has only just came out. CloudWatch Container Insights. So one of the problems with using Kubernetes over something like ECS, it didn't plug in that well with some of the other services, but now this is being I can't say because I've actually haven't used this. I don't use Kubernetes much anymore. I try to use ECS as much as possible. But I know that this is some of the sort of complaints you get about using Kubernetes and Amazon Web Services, is that you have to use all these other third parties to get logging and other things. I think that's about it for me. Anyone got any questions? Because I think the pizza's here yet.
Yep, they're just on their way up in the lift, so
Oh, beautiful.
you can probably all smell them.
Yeah. So we've probably got about 3 minutes of any questions. Not all at once. Yes.
Yeah, for session management, do we need to have SSM agent installed?
No. I know. Well, yes and no. Sorry. Do we need to have the agent installed? Yes, we do need to have it installed, but just go into read the documentation. It'll tell you when it was installed by default. I think Windows, it was after 2008, or could have been 2008.
16.
Yeah. And for Linux, it goes back, I think, about 2017. It's different for Ubuntu than it is for the Linux. But if you're using my parameter store method, your AMI is going to be updated all the time anyway. And so SSM will be installed by default. And once you've got onto one of those newer AMIs, you don't have to worry about the agent at all. It will be installed and be running. So all you really need to do is to, I didn't actually show you the policy, but you need to add a policy, and there's an Amazon policy called SSM EC2. It's one of their policies, so you just go and click and put that on. Now, there are some concerns about that policy might be a little bit too broad, so if you're worried about security, you might want to go and have a look at that, and then maybe take out some of the things. I think it does allow S3 access, so you may want to have a look at that in terms of you're really paranoid about security. But if you don't have that on, it won't work. So to get it to work, you need 3 things. You need the agent, you need the policy, and you need egress out to the internet. Next question. Yes. Sorry?
Why does it need egress out to the
I don't actually know why it does, but it does.
What about if we have SSM endpoint configured in account?
I don't know. I'm not sure that I have not tested that. I know that with some customers we build stacks that comes up with in a public network, has an IP address. I log in with SSM, and then at the end of the bootstrapping, it then puts an elastic IP address on, so it changes the public IP address, and you can't get in there for about 5 minutes. Because it's trying to get to the wrong IP address, and it takes about 5 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes for it to actually realise and to put the elastic IP address in there. So yeah, I haven't read anything about that, unfortunately. Yeah. Yes.
Just wondering, I haven't actually used the parameter store, but is there any way to implement your own ability to publish like a latest for whatever AMIs that you might be creating?
Yeah. So maybe you don't want to have it automatically done. So you could use this. This is parameter store. So I could say, I want to use this AMI and I want to have it frozen on there for a while. I don't want it updated. So you can do that. The problem with using that call to the public parameter store is it'll always get updated. So I haven't had any issues yet with Amazon Linux. Doesn't mean to say it won't happen, where you use the latest AMI ID and you get issues. I've had it with some Ubuntu and other ones, but not with the Amazon Linux yet. Yeah. So.
Is it gonna, if you use the Amazon's parameter store,
Yep.
and you have already spun up a CloudFormation stack,
Yep.
is it gonna update when the parameter store has been updated?
No, it will only update when you actually update the stack, because generally it'll build your launch configuration, and then the launch configuration will not get updated until you actually build the stack again. The call is made when you build the stack, gets injected into the launch configuration, and will stay there, which is what you want, really. It's sort of like generally what happens. Yes?
I just wondered, on the subject of Fargate, have you had any success or tried integrating Fargate with EKS using the virtual user?
No, I wouldn't. I've got better things to do. I've got enough torturous things to do. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, the aim really was to try and run Kubernetes completely
Yeah.
So there is this project that's being
Oh,
developed.
okay. No, I haven't heard anything about that. No.
I think that virtual couplet stopped at 2018.
Sorry,
That GitHub, that GitHub repo has been
virtual
stopped.
kubelet one.
Yeah, for AWS has been stopped happening since 2018, September or something.
Yeah, I think it depends which provider, but yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, generally, Paul has said we'll try and stay away from anything too exotic,
Yeah, it is actually on the roadmap for
Yeah.
AWS that they're going to
Yeah.
integrate EKS and
but
Fargate
they haven't done it yet.
natively, but it's
Yeah, well, that'd be good.
yeah.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Fargate only. So SSH is deliberately blocked, or it's like as per the policy like
Sorry, what was that? Fargate?
SSH, I understand that SSH is blocked, right? We cannot SSH into the Fargate instances.
No, you can't.
Okay, so which will restrict us to use some application. If they are using SSH, we cannot use those applications in Fargate. Just like Ansible.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, no, there are limitations. So what you're saying, you can't get into the containers on Fargate or the
Some applications they internally uses SSH connections to
Yeah.
the other instances, like Ansible. So we may not be able to use such kind of applications.
yeah. I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. Yeah, you need to look up documentation. Yeah.
Also, the question about Fargate, we actually have a quite complex Kubernetes workloads.
Yes.
Right now run on-prem
Yep.
Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah.
So I think in Fargate, my understanding is for that kind of complex ecosystem of Kubernetes workloads, it's very hard to
Yes.
do that
Yeah.
in Fargate.
Yeah. If you're going into web services and you're going to be using containers and you're not using Kubernetes, then I'd suggest you use ECS. But for some of the bigger workloads, then maybe Kubernetes might be a better option for you. Yes. Yeah. Horses for courses, really. Yeah. Okay, I think. Oh, I've got one more.
Sorry, I
last
think
question.
David will be there afterwards, so just catch him at
Yeah. Okay,
dinner. But
that's
the
it then.
pizza's ready.
Sorry.
Um,
It's pizza time.
Yep.
Let's get started. Thanks for coming along. Even in those weather conditions, it's pretty much a polar bear friendly weather today. So the thing is still going on. Take a photo of that. Jackson will bring up the email address later on and you can use me in the price. Polar bears are up here. Before I get into it, I'd like to give you a quick overview of what you can expect over the next 20 or 25 minutes. Just a quick overview, so as you know where you are. I'll start with a quick introduction, followed by why we need a landing zone and what it is, followed by what is undifferentiated heavy lifting, then how does that look like in AWS. Then I will go through the lessons that we have learned during running the landing zone, during the deployment process, but also then having it operational running. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. Okay, quick introduction. I'm the guy with no hair. My name is Gerald, and since I was born with a randomized password as a surname, I thought I might as well start working in IT. I work as a technical principal in Contino, and I focus on maximizing customer outcome and maximizing business value that we provide to the customer. And therefore, I only believe in public cloud. Yeah, anything else, any other cloud is just another on-prem. The other guy, my invisible friend here, Andrew Curry, he's a technical principal as well at Contino, but he decided to move to New York and work there for Contino, so he's currently in Melbourne sorting out his visa so that we can send him off next week. He's an absolute advocate of any automation, kind of has automation for breakfast to automate the rest of the day. But unfortunately we need to replace him here in Sydney. So if you're on the lookout for a new opportunity, with a couple of other roles as well in Sydney and Melbourne, just reach out to me. Okay, why do we need landing zones at all? Well, there are a lot of different drivers, and they will be different and will have different priorities as well, depending on what your industry you're working in. But one of them, a key driver, is always security and compliance. The other one is connectivity. You want some connectivity, that might be from on-premise to your cloud environment via the landing zone, and you want to leverage the connectivity that you set up once and use it for all your workload accounts. You also want to manage your accounts so it's not all a mess, so that you can control the account setup as well. You want to control the cost and get cost visibility across all your workload accounts. You want to achieve operational efficiencies, so set up one capability only once for, let's say, backup, and use that across the board for all your workload accounts. And then segregation of duty, of course. So how does the journey to the cloud start? So quite often it's more reactive than in any strategic way. So quite often it's coming out of any constraints that you have in your own data center. That might be it doesn't scale, or you don't have the features that you need for around automation. You don't have enough environments, for example, could be a driver, or the environments are inconsistent, so your UAT doesn't match up with production. Or the R is just painful. So I've seen it quite often that disaster recovery is the first step into the cloud. So in a funny scenario where they did actually switch over to the cloud, but they didn't get on-premise backup, so they had then to build up the actual production environment in the cloud. So then we figure out that we need a landing zone. How does it all start in the enterprise? So quite often it's all started with a huge talking phase. So that's the thinking phase. Everyone talks to each other. There's a lot of meeting groups being set up, center of excellence. It's really fairly centralized. The bigger the organization, the more enterprise architects you would have involved. In the meanwhile, the developers have to deliver something to the product owners, so they start setting up their own environment. So there's a manager coming along with a credit card, they set up a new AWS account, and they start with the first iterations and it's working pretty well. Then we go into the planning phase. So the enterprise architects come up with their first visio diagrams, beautiful Word documents, and have engaged the first consultancies, come up with a security assign, a couple of nice on-premise firewalls, of course. Meanwhile, the developers move on. They open up a second account because they need to go to production. And here we go. The next phase starts. It's the perfecting phase. Enterprise architects are now ready and present their solution to the developers. But they haven't factored in any on-premise connectivity and any other security constraints that they need to take on board. So it doesn't work for them. After the third phase, we quite often have optional finger pointing phase. So what is a landing zone? A landing zone has many different words. Platform, cloud, control plane, and so on. Just to make sure we're all on the same page for the rest of the presentation, I'll just give you the definition that I'm working on, what a landing zone is. It is the creation, configuration, management of public cloud accounts for enterprise customers in a way that is secure and production ready. So, do we need a landing zone? Well, what happens if you don't have one? I'll just give you an example from my own experience. It was about 5 to 6 years ago. I had a manager who asked me to set up an account in AWS because we were exposing a new API gateway solution. So he gave me the credit card. I set up the account, a couple of users, externals, no visibility if they're still working for the third party or not. After a while, we needed another solution that was for backup for Salesforce. Different credit card, it was a different project manager. Then we went into production with the other one. Unfortunately, it was Christmas time, and the Christmas party was sponsored out of the credit card as well. So that had used up the whole limit. From then on, all the AWS basically payments bounced back, but they build up every month because you owe the money for the last month, plus the new one for the consumption of the third month. So it took us more than 3 months to set up that whole purchase order and go through that. So meanwhile, one of the project managers asked me to change the currency from US dollars